It's been 25 years since the release of Sofia Coppola's now cult adaptation of Jeffrey Eugenides' novel The Virgin Suicides. Initially, Coppola's gauzy, dreamlike film about 5 doomed teenage sisters was seen by many critics as too quiet, too nostalgic, too stylized. At the turn of the millennium, only few movie directors were willing to explore girlhood, the way it's gazed at, misunderstood, romanticized, and to take its fragility and complexity seriously. Coppola's version felt both nostalgic and radical, as though she'd found a new cinematic language for adolescence. Today, the term girlhood is ever present in social media, and the echoes of Coppola's debut film and its aesthetic can be found across many art forms like photography, fashion, film, and art. In this video, I want to look back at how Coppola adapted Eugenides' novel, the choices that made The Virgin Suicides so distinct, and the mythic cultural afterlife of this film, from Tumblr boards to fashion exhibitions, and why revisiting it now feels like retracing the blueprint of an aesthetic that quietly shaped how an entire generation imagines adolescence. From the start, The Virgin Suicides felt like an elegy. In 1993, after several abandoned projects, 33-year-old Jeffrey Eugenides published his debut novel, a haunting story about 5 teenage sisters, Cecilia, Lux, Bonnie, Mary, and Therese Lisbon, living in a strict religious household who, over the course of 2 summers, all take their own lives. But the book isn't only about the girls. It also revolves around a group of neighborhood boys who become infatuated with the Lisbon sisters' beauty and mystery. In a way, the act of watching becomes the whole story. Eugenides' book is really about how girlhood is watched, mislabeled, and romanticized. The inspiration behind the story is almost as haunting as the novel itself. While visiting his brother's house in their hometown Detroit, Eugenides spoke to his nephew's babysitter. Quote, "She was a chatty Midwestern girl, seemingly untroubled by life, but in the span of our brief conversation, which didn't last more than 5 minutes, she told me, out of the blue, that she and her sisters had all attempted suicide. Shocked, I asked why. 'I don't know,' she said. 'We just had a lot of pressure.'" End quote. In my opinion, what makes this book truly unforgettable is its voice. It's narrated by a collective we, by a Greek chorus-like group of neighborhood boys, now grown up, who are trying, always fumbling to reconstruct the lives of the Lisbon sisters. They never fully knew them. In fact, no one in the entire neighborhood really knew the sisters. They only saw scraps, a light in the window, half-heard gossip, the kind of fragments you fill in with your teenage imagination. In their youth, they saw everything and understood almost nothing. Now they're still desperately combing through ephemera and artifacts of the most memorable event of their adolescence. That device makes the girls feel both everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Omnipresent but unknowable. That's why this book feels like a memory you can't stop prodding, even when it hurts. It's like a bruise you keep pressing, even though you know it'll sting. Quote, "In the end, we had the pieces of the puzzle, but no matter how we put them together, gaps remained. Oddly shaped emptinesses mapped by what surrounded them, like countries we couldn't name." End quote. I vividly remember reading the novel for the first time when I was 16, after many years of loving the film adaptation. And what really struck me then about the book is how sensorial it is. Jeffrey Eugenides doesn't just describe what the Lisbon girls look like, he makes you smell and taste their world. The book is filled with descriptions of body odors, smells of decay, the taste of peach schnapps, the stale popcorn air of the Lisbon house, the damp rot of their yard, Lux's watermelon-flavored chewing gum, the smell of jasmine soap the girls used for washing, even the smell of the family's army supply-like groceries once the Lisbons started to isolate themselves from their community. It's overwhelming, it's visceral, intensely physical, and I think this sensory overload is mostly the reason why, even a couple of years after its publication, there were multiple attempts to adapt the novel onto the big screen. The film can't capture smell, but it can capture atmosphere. The quest was to find the right filmmaker. There is an interesting parallel between Sofia Coppola's and Jeffrey Eugenides' early careers. Just as Eugenides initially struggled to stick with a project long enough to find his voice, Coppola also searched for the right artistic medium. Because she was the Francis Ford Coppola's daughter, the first stop was acting, and we all know how that ended. From there, she tried to break into TV with High Octane, a manic variety show about cars, fashion, and celebrity culture, which sadly only lasted 3 episodes. Then came fashion. An internship at Chanel, Milk-Fed, Coppola's baby tea brand, and finally X-Girl, co-founded with Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth. Coppola also starred in many music videos, including Sonic Youth's Mildred Pierce, and this is how she became friends with the members of the band. Like, how cool is that? So, one day, when Sofia was in her mid-20s, Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth, of all people, handed her a book with a blonde hair on the cover. The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. Quote, I remember seeing the cover, it was just all this blonde hair. I read it and loved it. It felt like Jeffrey Eugenides really understood the experience of being a teenager. The longing, the melancholy, the mystery between boys and girls. I loved how the boys were so confused by the girls, and I really connected with all that lazing around in your bedroom. I didn't feel like I saw that very much in films, not in a way I could relate to. End quote. She wrote the entire script before she had the rights to the book. Quote, I found out there was already a director attached to the project. It was a man and he was going to do it in a really dark, sexual way. I didn't agree, and I didn't want them to mess up a book that I loved. End quote. I really wanted to include this quote here because it feels startling, almost impossible to imagine what that film could have been. A story reframed not as melancholy, but as voyeurism. Instead of Coppola's soft, atmospheric language that shows how cruel the world can be to adolescent girls, while still treating them with empathy, we might have been left with something colder, more exploitative. Especially because even Jeffrey Eugenides himself was skeptical at first. In a 1998 email, he worried Coppola, quote, adapted the girls' story quite well, end quote, but the script was light on, quote, the boys, the passage of time, the right tone. Years later, he reread his note and called himself a whiny little bitch. He wasn't wrong.
I'm a visual person, I have to spread everything out to see it, but that's especially bad.
There are fantastic photographs shot by Bruce Weber that show Coppola's home office cluttered with visual references for the film. Stacks of magazines, torn pages pinned to the walls, black and white documentary images, fashion photographs. It looks less like a production office and more like Bill Owens' Christina's room from his series Suburbia, which, together with Tina Barney's Theatre of Manners, turned out to be the key visual reference for the film's aesthetic. Both photo albums capture this quiet strangeness of American domestic life in the 1970s, and you can clearly see their influence throughout the film. Another major influence was the 1975 film Picnic at Hanging Rock, especially visible in Cecilia's diary sequence. Coppola borrowed its hazy, dreamlike quality, that sense of girls becoming distant even as you look at them. But these references weren't just stylistic choices. They helped Coppola build an intimate world that expressed the Lisbon girls' story and isolation. What fascinates me is how differently Eugenides and Coppola choose to tell the Lisbon sisters' story. What they emphasize, what they leave out, and how those choices completely change the feeling of the story. Starting with the beginning. The book opens with an ending. An ambulance pulling up to the Lisbon house, Mary Lisbon's body being carried away. She's the last of the sisters to die. So if the title wasn't clear enough, Eugenides makes it explicit from the first sentence. There is no suspense in the traditional sense. We know the outcome. We read the book not to find out what happens, but to see how it happened. Together with the neighborhood boys, we sift through the fragments of memories and ephemera they've collected. Diaries, yearbook photographs, half-remembered interviews. The inevitability is chilling. Coppola makes a different choice. Her film begins by setting a scene and atmosphere. Suburbia on a hot and lazy summer afternoon. A woman waters her lawn. Lux Lisbon eats a popsicle. Sunlight peeks through the trees. We hear cicadas, happy children playing, and then finally, ambulance sirens. The sound carries us into Lisbon's blue and cold bathroom where Cecilia, the youngest sister, attempted to take her life. Coppola instantly lets us inside the house, which we rarely get to go into in Eugenides' novel unless someone from the neighborhood actually gets invited. Mostly, we remain on the outside, peering in through the eyes of the boys. Coppola's camera does both. She lingers in bedrooms, hallways, at kitchen tables, while also showing us the outside perspective. Neighbors passively staring, gossiping, observing. I also think that by opening the movie with Cecilia, the movie's title becomes somewhat ambiguous. Maybe what we are about to witness is a story about this one girl and how her suicide shapes her sisters, her parents, and the fragile suburban community around them. In the novel, the theme of that fragile suburban community and the city's decline plays much a bigger role than in the film. I find this choice pretty bold, considering this is where Eugenides' wit and dark humor really shine. For example, after Cecilia's death, there is a patchy attempt at support. Adults come to the funeral, they send flowers and notes. A chain link fence that had impaled Cecilia gets removed. Even two neighbors, Mr. Hutch and Mr. Peters, pay a visit to Mr. Lisbon, but instead of offering solace, they end up watching a baseball game with him. Quote, "Neither of the men mentioned the suicide. I wanted to, I really did," said Mr. Hutch. "I just never got around to do it." End quote. Initially, Cecilia's death isn't even reported in the local newspaper because, quote, "the editor, Mr. Bowby, felt such depressing information wouldn't fit between the front page article on the Junior League flower show and the back page photographs of grinning brides." End quote. Passages like this make you chuckle before the deeper meaning sets in. Eugenides paints a narrow, self-absorbed, waspy suburb where keeping up appearances matters more than the life of a teenage girl. His world is small. One family, one neighborhood, one city quietly collapsing in on itself. Coppola, meanwhile, widens the lens. She trims away much of that local gossip and moral hypocrisy, but what she captures instead is much more universal. How a culture, not just a community, often fails its teenagers. In the film, one family's tragedy turns into the quiet brutality every teenage girl eventually learns to live with. The way the world looks at you, misunderstands you, and then moves on. Coppola shows this cultural failure in the way she frames the Lisbon sisters. Her camera often mirrors how others look at them. When the neighborhood boys watch Lux, the promiscuous one, Coppola presents her through extreme close-ups. A sunburned shoulder, the curl of her smile, a twinkle in her eye, her naked feet on the table. Lux becomes a series of body parts, not a person. It's the way teenage girls are so often seen, noted only in pieces, interpreted only through desire, and flattened into an idea they never agreed to perform. In the scene where the girls appear together at school for the first time after Cecilia's death, the camera follows them from behind, letting them merge into a single wave of shiny blonde hair. They barely look like students, more like a vision. One of the boys' mothers glances at them and says they have a bright future ahead of them, a line delivered with that familiar mix of admiration and resentment. Here we have an adult woman looking at the promise of youth she no longer possesses. In just a few seconds, Coppola shows how effortlessly a community can turn teenage girls into symbols of innocence, of beauty, of danger, of loss. Anything but human. At one point in the novel, Eugenides calls the Lisbon sisters a four-headed creature, and Coppola makes that metaphor literal here, but she also complicates it, because when the camera finally widens, the illusion cracks. The uniforms are identical, but the girls are not. Lux's skirt is just a little too short. She ties a sweater around her waist to give her body more shape. Meanwhile, Therese hides inside her boxy shirt. Mary, the older sister, tries to look more composed by wearing a watch, and Bonnie is the only one with short hair. And suddenly, the girls are individuals. Flirty, awkward, hopeful, private. Coppola's framing does exactly what the boys cannot. It restores the girls' interiority. It shows how much gets lost when a culture looks at teenage girls only long enough to decide what they represent. And it also suggests that the tragedy of the Lisbon sisters isn't just what happens inside their home, but it's in the way the world keeps misseeing them until the only space left for the real selves is the one they create in secret. And if the close-ups show how the boys over-sexualize Lux, the wide shots reveal how the world treats her for being promiscuous. A big part of both the novel and the film revolves around Lux and Trip Fontaine's love story, if you can even call it that. Trip is the school's heartthrob, the kind of charismatic boy every girl is falling for, and the only girl who doesn't is Lux, which of course makes him chase her even harder. But the Lisbon family's Catholic strictness is everywhere. The girls aren't allowed to wear makeup, buy beauty magazines, make private phone calls, and they certainly aren't allowed any real dates except for chaperoned parties, so Trip really has to work hard to take Lux and the rest of the sisters to the homecoming dance. After homecoming, when Trip abandons her on the football field because he finally got what he wanted and then just got sick of her, Coppola pulls the camera all the way back. Lux wakes up all alone at dawn. She's vulnerable and fragile. Trip's cruelty is especially painful to watch because he, of all people, knew exactly what Lux was risking. He sat in the Lisbon living room. He saw how tightly the girls were monitored, how strict their parents were. He could have just woken her up. He could have helped her make curfew. But he didn't. And Coppola's wide shot makes this situation feel enormous. Lux realizes she's entirely on her own. She trusted someone she shouldn't. And now she will be punished for it. When I first watched The Virgin Suicides, I was 12 years old and frankly far too young and naive, or maybe innocent, to understand it. But I remember being completely mesmerized by the visuals, by the ominous Air soundtrack, by this moody sadness. I have never seen anything like it before. Then, 2 years later, I watched it again, and as embarrassing as it is to admit now, I misunderstood it completely. What I've taken out of this film at the age of 14 is that I was supposed to be this mysterious, alluring yet casually flirty creature for the boys. I know. I still couldn't see past the atmosphere and the aesthetics of the film. It took me roughly 2 more years of growing up and maturing to finally understand it. And I know I'm not alone. In fact, as an adult, I've spoken to many women who are big fans of this film, yet at some point in their adolescence, they fell into the same trap. But that's exactly what Coppola is showing, how easily beauty can mask suffering and how easy it is, especially when you're young and naive, to follow the boys' point of view without even criticizing it. In many ways, my own misunderstanding of the film mirrors theirs. Coppola's movie may initially attract you with its gauzy, dreamlike softness, but it later reveals the brutality beneath. In many ways, the book is way darker and grittier than the movie. In the film, the 4 remaining sisters die together, but in the novel, Mary is saved at first. She lingers for months afterward. There is a chilling passage about the city founding a bench to commemorate the Lisbon sisters, even though Mary was still alive. And what makes it even worse is how quickly the boys, the same boys who spent years obsessing over the sisters, simply let Mary slip from their attention. She survives but becomes invisible. She doesn't fit the story they were committed to telling, so she gets written out of it. And by the time she dies, it is almost an afterthought.
So the Virgin Suicides.
The Virgin Suicides.
The Virgin Suicides it's my ride or die.
The Virgin Suicides.
Italian director Alice Rovaca once wrote, quote, "I can easily recall the day when, on the verge of the new millennium, I went to see the Virgin Suicides. My gaze was transformed that day. Sofia, like the modern-day Calypso, weaved a golden cage, a beautiful, sun-kissed prison from which one can only exit through the darkest, most secret door, that of death." End quote. That description captures something essential about the film's afterlife. Coppola showed girlhood as something luminous, but also as something that slowly closes in on you. And that feeling has continued to drift through culture long after the Lisbon sisters' story ended. What stands out now is how many artists seem to return to the same emotional place. not because they're consciously referencing Coppola, but because the film named a mood many people recognized in themselves. A kind of soft sadness, a sense of being watched, the ache of wanting to be understood but never quite reaching it. You can see this mood appear in photographs of quiet bedrooms, in portraits of teenage girls looking both present and far away, in fashion that mixes sweetness with something sharper underneath. It is less about imitation and more about the shared feeling that the film brought into focus. It also shaped how a whole generation expressed themselves online. From Tumblr to TikTok, the internet spaces are filled with overexposed photographs, messy bedrooms, and that, obviously doctor, you've never been a 13-year-old girl quote, and the kind of romantic melancholy that feels both protective and painful. The film keeps appearing in exhibitions, photography books, and new interpretations of girlhood in cinema. The imagery returns again and again, but its impact goes deeper than the aesthetics. Coppola captured the truth that is difficult to say plainly, that beauty can feel like a trap, that growing up can be both dreamy and frightening, and that some experiences are easier to understand in hindsight than in the moment. And maybe that's why the film endures. It did not try to explain girlhood. It simply held the feeling long enough for people to recognize something in themselves. And once you recognize it, it becomes impossible to forget.